All right, guys, so you've just watched a video learning about World War I and how that crisis impacted Utah. We're going to move forward and we are going to be learning about our next worldwide crisis called the Great Depression. Now, just a reminder, guys, these crises were events that impacted just about every person on the face of the planet. Our goal today is to understand what was the Great Depression and how did it impact people in Utah. Before we begin, just a reminder, you should be taking notes on this lesson in your Unit 4 digital note packet, okay? That's the one that looks like this. And today we're talking about the Great Depression. We're just going to be going over this section right here, all right? So go ahead, please follow along. Feel free to pause the video so you can take your notes, but we're going to go ahead and dive right in. So guys, like I said, today we're talking about what was something called the Great Depression. Now this happened from the years 1929 to 1939. So it started about 10 years after World War I ended. Before we jump into the lesson, we're going to define a few words, okay? I'm going to go over each of these words. Like I said, feel free to pause the lesson and you may write those down in your notes. So the first term is called economy. So guys, when you hear the word economy, I want you to think about businesses, jobs, money, all right? A country's economy refers to all of those things. For example, if an economy is doing well in a country, right, what that means is that a lot of people have jobs, okay? Businesses are doing well, people are making lots of money, the economy is strong in that situation. Guys, the next word we're going to talk about is called a depression. Okay, now this relates to the word economy. Lots of times when we hear the word depression, we think about being deeply sad, right? Well, guys, when we're talking about an economy, a depression is actually a long, severe recession or a decline, drop, or fall in an economy. So, guys, when an economy is not doing well, that means their businesses are struggling. A lot of people don't have jobs and a lot of people aren't making a lot of money. When an economy is doing really badly for a long time, we call that a depression, all right? A couple more words. Black Tuesday. Guys, Black Tuesday is the day that marks the beginning of the Great Depression. It was such a dark day that's what historians and that's what people call it now is Black Tuesday. And our last vocab word is Hooverville. Guys, a Hooverville, and we'll talk more about this later, but it was a shanty town built by unemployed men looking for work during the Great Depression. In other words, it was a town built by people who didn't have jobs, okay, people who couldn't afford to rent an apartment or to buy a house, all right? Okay, we're going to go ahead and move forward. So in order to understand the Great Depression, we first need to talk briefly about a man by the name of Herbert Hoover. So guys, in 1928, a man by the name of Herbert Hoover became the President of the United States. Pretty good looking guy, huh? So Herbert Hoover, guys, was a self-made millionaire. In other words, what that means is he made himself rich. He didn't get his money from his parents or from other people that just gave it to him. He had to work hard for it. In fact, his motto was work hard and everything will work out, okay? Because of what he represented, because he was such a hard worker, people loved him. In fact, that's one reason why they wanted him to be their president. In the year 1928, Herbert Hoover overwhelmingly won the presidential election. If you look at this map, all of the red states are the states that voted for Herbert Hoover to be president. The blue states were people who wanted another man with the last name of Smith to win. Guys, as you can see, Herbert Hoover won by a landslide. People loved him. They wanted him to be the president. Well, guys, something happened in the year 1929, okay, the year after Herbert Hoover became president, that changed everything, all right, called the Great Depression. We're going to watch two brief videos that's going to help us understand what was the Great Depression, what happened that changed everything. So Go ahead and listen carefully as we watch this.
The Great Depression was a dramatic worldwide economic calamity which started in 1929 and lasted until the late 30s. Most people believe it began with the U.S. stock market collapse of October 1929. By 1932, U.S. stocks were only worth 20% of what they were prior to the crisis, and 1 year later, almost half of all United States banks had failed. By 1935, roughly 750,000 farms had been lost to bankruptcy or distressed sales.
According to historian David Kennedy, by 1929, commercial bankers were in the unusual position of loaning more money for stock market and real estate investments than for commercial ventures. I wonder if we would ever find ourselves in that position again. Oh, right, we did in 2008. Anyway, it's tempting to see the stock market crash as the cause of the Depression, possibly because it turns American economic history into morality play. But the truth is that the stock market crash and the Depression were not the same thing. A lot of rich people lost money in the market, but what made the Great Depression was massive unemployment and accompanying hardship. And this didn't actually begin until like 1930 or 1931. The end of 1929 was actually okay, unless you were a farmer or a stockbroker, obviously. So what did actually cause the Depression? Well, that's a big question, and it's one that economists have struggled with ever since.
Let's talk about these two videos. So I want to make something very, very clear. Black Tuesday, all right, the day the stock market crashed in 1929, historians say that that was what marked the beginning of the Great Depression. But guys, the stock market crash is not what caused the Great Depression. What ultimately caused the Great Depression was massive unemployment, okay? People losing their jobs ultimately because banks failed and businesses failed, all right? That's what caused the Great Depression, was banks failing, businesses failing, and then people losing their jobs, right? A lot of people, remember, not just a few, but a lot of people. Guys, because of the Great Depression and other things like the 2008 economic recession, the United States governments and banks throughout the country are prepared for something like the Great Depression to happen again. Because, guys, we don't want that to happen again. And so there are things in place now that weren't in place in 1929 that are meant to prevent something like the Great Depression from ever happening again, okay? So we are in a much safer, much more secure place than the people of the United States were in 1929, okay? But let's keep going, okay, guys? The Great Depression, because of what was happening, it changed society and affected a lot of people. And ultimately, guys, that's where this guy comes into the picture. His name was Franklin Roosevelt. He was a man of the people, okay? So people loved him. He eventually became president of the United States, and people loved him so much, they elected him to be president 4 times. That's a long time to be president. The question that he asked, instead of just saying, work hard and you'll be fine, he said, how can we figure this out together, all right? How can we help each other get out of this Great Depression? And when he ran for president, he proposed something called the New Deal, in which he promised to create new jobs, and not just a few new jobs, guys, but a lot of new jobs. People wanted to hear this because remember, people just wanted a job, all right? In fact, let's take a look at this. This is the same picture we looked at earlier. This was the election of 1928. A lot of people loved Herbert Hoover in 1928, right? Well, let's take a look at the election of 1932. Guys, in 1932, things flip-flopped. The red states are still the states that voted for Hoover. The blue states are the states that voted for Franklin D. Roosevelt. Sometimes you'll see his name abbreviated FDR. Those are just his initials, okay? So if I say FDR, I mean Franklin D. Roosevelt. You'll see most states were sick and tired of President Hoover, and they wanted this new guy, Franklin Roosevelt, to change things around, all right? The last thing we're going to talk about is a little reminder, guys. A Hooverville it's a shanty town built by unemployed men looking for work. So, guys, if you were out of a job for long enough, you were not able to afford a house. You couldn't afford to pay rent, to live in an apartment. And so what a lot of people would do, guys, is they would build their own houses in parks on the outskirts of cities, places where they could build a random house and and survive, right? These are just a few pictures showing you what a lot of people lived in, okay? The conditions they had to live through because they didn't have jobs because of the Great Depression. They called them Hoovervilles to kind of, I don't know, maybe make fun of or point out the fact that President Herbert Hoover really didn't help them that much. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Great Depression. As time goes on, we'll be talking more about how this impacted Utah because, guys, let's be totally honest, the Great Depression impacted thousands of people in the state of Utah, okay? If you have questions, please reach out to your teacher and they can help answer those.